Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the very first podcast in the Jakob Kaydi Podcast. I'm your host, Jakob Kaydi, and today's topic is the value shift and why I think democracy is struggling within the age of the internet. I want you to imagine you are walking down your local street. Maybe it's a local park, or maybe it's your shopping area. You see some rubbish that hasn't been picked up in months, or maybe a local business has closed down and it's going to lose a lot of jobs for the local area. I want you to stop for a moment and feel what you are feeling about that situation. Now take a moment to reflect, maybe even write it down. What you have just done is create a hierarchy of value. Now, I want you to imagine something else. I want you to imagine you're a politician or even a civil servant. You've lived in the capital city since you're old enough to leave home, and you spent the last week getting emails about the situations you just imagined yourself seeing and feeling. I want you for a moment to feel how you'd feel having to respond to all those emails when you haven't even seen the situation yourself. That feeling you're feeling right now is often what many people who run your countries often feel all the time. It is its own culture in many ways, and different from the culture you feel as you walk down your local street. Many politicians have been raised up in a culture that makes networking and being in the capital the only sensible option for their careers, whereas many of the people who are affected by politicians don't often see the capital in their lifetime and stay living in the same area they often grew up in. Each of these groups have a different set of values they feel should be at the top of the hierarchy of value, and this often leads to conflict in society when societies face challenging issues. This is what I call the value shift, because we've just experienced the exact same issue together, but in completely different ways. And you're probably wondering, cool, but why does that matter to me in my day-to-day life? And to explain this, I'm going to explain to you a chart I've designed that explains the phenomenon I'm talking about. To illustrate the chart, I want you to imagine a river. Every single day, millions of tiny drops of water flow into it. One drop doesn't change much, but over years, those drops carve out valleys, change landscapes, and even alter the course of the river itself. Politics works in much the same way. When we watch the news, we tend to focus on elections. We ask why one party won and another lost. But elections are often the very end of a much longer chain of events. At the beginning of that chain is what I call the political class. Politicians, journalists, think tanks, civil servants, commentators, people whose job it is to think about politics every single day. For you to understand this, I want you to imagine you've started a new job at the office. You don't arrive with the same habits as everyone else, but over time, as you begin spending more time with your colleagues, you begin speaking like them. You share the same inner jokes as the rest of the team. You start worrying about the things they worry about. You haven't consciously decided to change. You've simply absorbed the culture around you and begun to understand the values of the people around you unconsciously. That's why culture comes first. Before anyone writes a manifesto or drafts legislation, There's already an environment shaping what people think is important. And at first you barely notice it. After a while, the culture simply becomes normal, and you start believing the world itself has always been this way. That's often what ideology does. It doesn't tell you what you think. It shapes what you don't even notice. It simply changes the values of your hierarchy. Now, you're probably thinking, hang on a minute, Jacob. Doesn't exactly the same thing happen to ordinary people? And I think the answer is yes. In fact, I think this is where we begin to understand why democracy feels like it's struggling in the age of the internet. Every single one of us builds our hierarchy of values from the world we experience every day. Think about your own life for a moment. If you're a farmer in rural Lincolnshire, the things that concerns you each morning are probably very different from someone commuting in central London. If you're a nurse, you'll naturally notice pressures in your local hospital. If you own a small business, you'll probably pay far more attention to taxation, regulation, and energy prices. None of these people are irrational. They are simply building their priorities from the world they encounter. This is important because politics often assumes people begin with the same hierarchy of values, but I don't think they do. I think they construct that hierarchy through the communities they live in, the work they do, the conversations they have, and increasingly the information they consume online. So where does this leave us? Well, if my theory is correct, then perhaps we've been asking the wrong question all along. We've spent years asking whether the internet has broken democracy. But perhaps the internet hasn't broken democracy at all. Perhaps it has simply exposed something that has always been there. For most of human history, we've lived in relatively small communities. The people around us often shared similar jobs, similar traditions, similar values, and similar ways of looking at the world. The internet changed that almost overnight. Suddenly, your ideas weren't just competing with the people on your street. They were competing with millions of people, each carrying a completely different hierarchy of values. Think about the last political argument you saw online. Was it really about tax, immigration, climate change, or was it just two people, each with a completely different hierarchy of values, trying to solve the same problem from completely different starting points? The internet may not have broken democracy. It may simply have forced us to confront a reality we never truly fully appreciated. That before we debate policies, before we vote, before we even choose a political party, we first decide what we value. And perhaps understanding that is the first step towards understanding why modern politics feels so divided. Thank you for joining me for the first episode of the Jakob Kaydi Podcast. And until next time, keep asking difficult questions.